let's generate some JSON files with data generation. Alright, friends, back and tell you once more, and in this tutorial we're going to be adding some data generation to our project here for 1.19.3 for Forge. And this is actually a quite interesting topic because this will allow us to generate the block states JSON files and the model JSON files and even all of the crazy loot table and recipe JSON files. All of this is basically going to be done in code and then they will be generated automatically. This is also extremely important for world generation because world generation in 1.19.3 is basically JSON file only, and for that we need the data generation. This is why we'll do the data generation now, and then next two tutorials is going to be tree generation and OR generation. So let's start with the data generation. In the tutorial mod package, we're going to right click new package called DataGen, or whatever you prefer to call it, but I call it DataGen, and then we need a lot of classes. We first of all need the data generators class, and then we need to continue with some other classes. The other one is the mod block state provider class. There we go. And then we'll create the mod item model provider class. And then we'll continue with the mod loot table provider. And we have the mod recipe provider. And then we also need the mod block loot tables. There we go. So those are all the classes that we need. And we'll start with the mod block state provider. So as the name suggests, this will generate the block states JSON files, and it will actually do a little bit more than that, but that's going to be really cool. And this will extend the block state provider. Very important that we choose the correct one, and that is the MicroForge client model generators. This is the one that we want to choose, and we want to implement the register state and models method, and we also want to create the constructor matching super. Now this is going to be okay. We can delete the mod ID over here because the mod ID we have under tutorial mod, so we don't need to pass this into the constructor. And then inside of the register state and models, here is where we basically register everything. Now I am going to have one helper method. Now this is of course all available to you in the GitHub repository, and you can see this is the block with item, where basically here we're also creating a simple block item. So this is a method that is already inside of the class over here that we're overriding. So you can see this creates a simple block and a simple block item. This just makes it a little bit easier. So we can say block with item, and then we can just pass in mod blocks dot, for example, black opal block. There you go, and then that's it. We can duplicate this, and we can also add the OR, and then we can duplicate this a couple more times to also add the deep slate, and we also add the end stone, and we can also add the netherrack. And there you go. That is actually all that we need to do in our case to generate all of our block state JSON files. This will generate all of those exactly the way they are, and it will also generate the block model files as well as the item model files. All right, so that's the first class done. Let's continue to the mod item model provider over here. That's going to extend the item model provider. There you go. Once again, we only got one class in this case. Implement the register models method, and then hover over this again, create constructor matching super. We can once again delete the mod ID over here and just use tutorial mod.mod ID, and that's going to be totally fine. Now for the item model provider, I actually have two helper methods in this case. This is the simple item and also the handheld item. So this can be pretty interesting for swords or any type of tool where you want the handheld look. So the handheld look is basically if you're in a third person, the way that you hold a sword is different than you hold a normal item, and that is why you have two different methods over here. But usually the simple item will suffice, and the simple item is actually enough for both of our items. So this is going to be the black opal as well as the raw black opal. And once again, that is it. You just add all of your items over here with simple items. Now if it's more complicated items, then either you have to create your own custom helper methods, and you can also go to the item model provider, to the model provider, and here there are some methods that you could use. So you can see this is a cube single texture with existing parents. So there's a couple of examples that we have here, but usually in general, the simple item for, every simple item is pretty much enough. That is the mod item model provider done as well. Let's continue. Do we want to continue with the loot tables? Yes, but for that we actually need to go to the mod block loot tables first, because this is actually a class that we're going to use in the mod loot table provider in just a moment. So let's take a look at this first, and that will extend the block loot sub provider. There we go, and we'll hover over this, implement methods, generate method, absolutely. We'll hover over this again, create constructor matching super. We actually get some unmapped parameters, but we don't even need them because here we're just going to put in set off and just an empty set. And here we'll say feature flags, very important, this guy, dot registry dot all flags. There we go. We also want to make this public. That's also quite important, right? We need to override another method, and that is the get known blocks method. This is extremely important to get, well, basically correct. So the general idea is that we want to know every block for which a block loot table can be created if we were to just, not pass in anything and we were to generate loot tables for our blocks, it would say trying to generate block loot tables for non-blocks. And that's of course not what we want. We want to basically tell it, hey, every block that I've registered, and that would be in modblocks.blocks, right? So this is the deferred register. And then we're saying get all of those entries. And then it gets a little complicated because now we're doing some, insanity here with Java basically, but we're just creating a stream and then we're mapping each individual element. So basically every one of our registry objects, we're saying, okay, what I wanted you to do for every one of those is just to call registry object get. So this would be : get. And then we want to make this an iterator because in this case, we want a iterable over here of type block. And we get the blocks from our registry objects by calling get. That is all that this basically does. It's basically just providing all of our custom blocks here in a iterable. It basically just provides all of our blocks in a iterable form so that the class can continue using this. So we need to generate a loot table for all of our blocks that we've registered over here. That means that we will get an error if we don't add all of our blocks. Now in our case, right, if we go into our blocks over here, we only have a couple of them, so we don't have that many. And that's going to be okay. So we can say, for example, this is going to be the easy one. This is drop self. And then we just say modblocks.blackopalblock.get. And that is literally all that we need to do for a block to drop itself. Now for the ORs, it's a little more complicated because if you remember back in the loot tables, right, the OR loot table, that was a little more complicated. But of course, ORs are already a thing that exists. So we can just say add. And then we can say this is for modblocks. Let's say the black opal or.get, very important. And then this is a function of block, and this will do the following. It will create, and you can see all of the different builders that exist, right? We can see cheaters, only drop, mushroom block drop, grass drop. So there's a bunch of stuff that you can take a look at here. Highly recommended, but we want to choose the OR block. And the first one is of course going to be the black opal or.get. And the second one is the mod items.raw black opal.get. And then we can close this and there you go. So that is all we need for the OR drops. Now in this case, we're just going to duplicate this and we will say deep slate here and deep slate here. And we will say netherrack here, and let's say netherrack here, and then here we will say endstone, and here we will say endstone. And now all four of our OR loot tables will also generate completely like we would expect them to. And no errors will be present because we are generating a loot table for all of our known blocks. I'll show you what the error looks in a moment when we're actually running this, but for the time being, we're going to be fine with this. And then we can proceed to continue with the mod loot table provider over here. This is actually very simple. This is just a public static loot table provider method called create, and we will put in a pack output over here, calling it output. That's going to be fine. And then we're just returning a new loot table provider, passing in the output, and then a set.of, nothing in this case, and then a list.of, new loot table provider sub provider entry, exactly the first one. And then let's format this a little bit differently. We want to pass into this sub provider entry modblock loot tables : new, comma, loot context param_sets, this guy right here, param_sets dot block. And then we can close this with a semicolon. And there you go. That is the mod loot table providers done. And you can probably guess that this list over here could be extended with other loot table providers, right? With chests or fishing or something like that. That is indeed the case. For our purposes, we will just add the blocks, but that is expandable, definitely. So that is done as well as this one. And now the mod recipe provider here as the last provider that we need. And this one is interesting as well. This will extend the recipe provider. There we go, this one. And it would also implement the iCondition builder. Very important that we implement both the interface and also extend the class. We want to override the build recipes method, and then we want to hover over it again, create constructor matching super. The pack output, we'll just call this output over here and pass this in, just so it's a little bit nicer. And this is actually the consumer. That's going to be fine. There you go. And then the build recipes. Here is where we build our recipes. Now, how do we build the recipes? We build the recipes with either a shapeless recipe builder over here or a shaped recipe builder. So either one of those work. And we can actually take a look at, if we middle mouse button click, we can see where it's being used, and it is being used in the recipe provider. This is the one that we're actually using as well. So if we go in here and we say, for example, door builder, we can literally just put in a item like the ingredient, and then it's going to create a door for us. So if we look at this, right, this is going to create a shaped recipe for a door, and it just is immediately going to work. This is really, really cool that there's like, I mean, look at how many things there are, right? There's buttons, there's chests, planks from logs. So there's a lot of stuff that is already in here. Or cooking, for example, absolutely amazing. So there's a bunch of things that we can get very, very easily. So we can, for example, say, or smelting, we want to first of all pass in the consumer over here. And then you can see there's a bunch of stuff that we want to say. This is, in this case, list of. This is the item like. So this is the item that we want to put in, raw black opal or .get. Then a recipe category. I'm unsure where the recipe category over here goes in. Let's put this under miscellaneous, maybe, something like that. And then we get an item like. This is going to be the output. So mod items dot black opal dot get. Then we get a float. This should be the experience 0.7f. And then the integer is the length in ticks, that is 200. And then the string is the group. So that would be black opal. And that will create an ore smelting recipe for this in this example. What I highly recommend is going through the recipe provider and taking a look at the different types of, well, already created methods over here, because my God, there are an insane amount of things, and they, you just don't need to do anything else. So one extremely useful example is the 9-block storage recipe over here, which is immediately going to create exactly what we've done already. And that is going to be the idea that you put a black opal block in, get 9 black opal out, and also the reverse, right? Putting 9 black opals in and getting an opal block out. So that is literally what this does. It will create both of those recipes, and we don't need to do anything extra for this. So we can literally just say 9 storage block recipe over here, and we can say consumer, pass in the recipe category. I'm unsure, maybe building blocks, something like that. The item like mod items dot black opal dot get. I'm pretty sure that the first one is the one that you will, yeah, the first one is the item basically, and the second one is the block. Then we need another recipe category, I'm pretty sure. Let's just do miscellaneous again, and then we need another mod items. No, actually mod blocks. This time mod blocks dot black opal block dot get. And there we go. Now we get the 9 storage recipes as well. If we wanted to make this like explicit without using this helper method, I'm just going to copy over and then comment out the 2 ways that we can do this individually, just so that we've seen this, right? So these are the 2 ideas, and this is both the consumer over here at the end. There we go, and I will comment this out just so that you have this. So this is basically a way of building a shapeless recipe and also building a shaped recipe. But like I said, usually if you are using things, similar recipes to vanilla, then you can always use the helper methods. Just take a look at the recipe provider, just middle mouse button click on the recipe provider over here, and you have everything you will ever need pretty much here. And if not, then you can also build your own recipes using either the shapeless recipe builder or the shaped recipe builder. Right, and with that, all the providers are actually done. Pretty cool. Now we just need the data generators class, and this one is very interesting indeed. So this gets an add mod dot and then dot event bus subscriber mod ID equals to tutorial mod dot mod ID, and then a bus equal to mod dot event bus subscriber dot bus dot mod. Very important that this is there, otherwise this will not work. Very important, double check this, that you have this done correctly. Then we need a public static void gather data method, and we need the gather data event, and we're just going to call this the event. And then this is also extremely important, we need the add subscribe event annotation above this particular method. Otherwise this also will not work, extremely important. Inside of here, we need a data generator called generator. And this is equal to event.getGenerator. That's fairly straightforward. We also need a pack output called pack output equal to generator.getPackOutput. Okay, also we're still here. This is all good. Existing file helper called existing file helper equal to event.getExisting file helper. This is just, basically to clear up the clutter and not always having to write event.get whatever. That's the general idea here. And there's all of the 3 things that we need. Then we want to say generator.addProvider. We're going to say true. I'm going to say new mod recipe provider, passing in the pack output. So that one is pretty good. Let's add another one, true, over here. And this is going to be the mod loot table providers.create, passing in the pack output. And there we go. Generator.addProvider, true. A new mod block state provider, and passing in the output as well as the existing file helper. And this one we can duplicate, and we can say mod item model provider. And this also takes in the pack output as well as the existing file helper. And with that, we have done it. That's actually all that we need to do. Now, it is quite an involved process, but now, because we've done everything, if you now want to add, another item model, right? You add another item, just literally duplicate, bam, change the item here, done. And then you just have to run a specific task again. And that is the interesting thing, because for this, we actually need to go to our Gradle tab over here, and we want to run data. This is extremely important. So let's double click this and let's just see what happens. So we might get an error. That is absolutely fine. Don't worry about it. I'm going to basically tell you like what the different errors are that are, well, interesting for this. So we're just going to let this run through, and you can see if this comes up and it existing, was forcibly closed and you get a failed over here, that is totally fine. The failed is not an issue. What's most important is that you get in all providers took XMS, right? If you get this, then you know this has actually worked, right? Then you know this is fine. You can even see that we have written 28 new files, or 29 basically, and you can go into the generated over here. So sources set generated, and you can see assets, block states. Look at this, models. We got the item models, we got the block models. We even got our data over here, the loot tables. We get the recipes. Now they are under Minecraft in this case, which is kind of interesting why they would be under Minecraft. It's kind of interesting that they're under Minecraft, but yeah, regardless, they all generated, and we can see the loot tables over here, for example, this. So for example, the ore loot table, everything is in here, absolutely amazing. This is why we can't have nice things. Of course, if we're using the already existing methods over here from the recipe provider, everything is going to be put under Minecraft, which is of course not correct. You don't want it under Minecraft, you want it under your own mod ID. And to do that, you need to do the very sensible thing. Instead of, passing in a mod ID or something like that. No. You wanna just copy over the method, because that makes sense, right? It's not like I'm annoyed by this or anything like that. Absolutely not. I mean, this is completely sensible. I guess it is what it is. We're just going to copy those over, and we're going to rejoice that this is not crazy at all. So everywhere where it says a resource location, we just want to add the tutorial mod over here as well. There you go. So now we have the 9 stored block done. And then when it comes to the ore smelting, then we can go ore smelting, and we can copy this over as well. And I believe we also need the ore cooking for this, because otherwise it's not going to work, because this one doesn't have the correct one. So we want to copy the ore cooking here as well. Delightfully makes a lot of sense over here. I mean, it just is incredibly sensible. And then in the save, so this calls the save method, we want to, as the second parameter, instead of get name over here, we actually want to make a new resource location. And then we want to put inside of this the tutorial mod.mod ID, and then we want to say get item name and pass this result. There you go. There's of course a comma here. There you go. And that should now also make this proper. Absolutely amazing. So for the sake of argument, let's delete all of the already generated files, and let's run this again with our copied methods over here. The absolute madness that is sometimes DataGen. This is why I continuously go back and forth if DataGen is worth it or not, because I mean, this is ridiculous. Like, why is there no way of doing it properly? There might be, by the way, but because there's no documentation, there's nothing. And all of a sudden, all of our recipes and loot tables are under tutorial mod ID. So absolutely fine here. But yeah, still kind of stupid. At this point, do we really need this? I mean, at that point, you can also just use those and not even bother with these methods. I thought that this would be a nicer way of doing it, but apparently it isn't. But now that all the JSON files are correctly and properly generated, we can now, well, let's just run this again, and then we will see the first error that comes up, which is not detrimental, but it is one thing that might come up. If you have done this, you can see we're getting an entry XYZ is a duplicate because, and this is very important, we now have the JSON files twice. We have them in our generated folder, and we also have them in our, well, basically manual folder over here. What I will do is I will just delete our manual ones. So I'll delete the block states, the models, as well as the entire tutorial mod folder in the data folder. Now, I would highly recommend you back them up. So you make a backup of this, and then instead of deleting them, just, make sure that they are outside of our project over here, so we no longer have them. And then if we run this again, then everything should be fine and there's no more duplicates here. So you can see, once again, this is an okay error. We're okay with this as long as we get all providers took however many milliseconds. We know everything worked out totally fine and the error is gone. Next point of order, I also wanted to show you if you go into the mod block loot tables over here, and let's just comment out this drop self over here, then in this case, one of our known blocks, right, because we're passing through all of our blocks here with this iterator, is not going to have a block loot table, which of course doesn't work. And we can see this error if we just run data. We'll see that, this particular mod block does not have a loot table associated with it. We'll be able to see this in just a moment. And you can see we get a invocation target exception. Go to this one, go to the forge run data over here. And then if we move up, you can see missing loot table for black opal block. So you can see this basically points to exactly what is the issue, and that is that we don't have a loot table for our block because we need a loot table for every block that we're registering over here. So let's just do that, and there you go. Now, if there ever is a block that you don't want this to happen, what you can just do is you can go to the mod blocks class and you can add a no loot table property over here. And in theory, if I'm understanding this correctly, it should just jump over that one and not concern itself with it. So basically, if you really don't want a certain block to have a loot table associated with it, you can just call that and then you should be fine as well. Right, and that is indeed the data generators done here. So a pretty crazy thing. If you have this run data over here, you can just click on this drop down and change to run client again. And then when you press the run button, then you're going to run the client again. And in theory, everything should work. And indeed, everything's still working totally fine. And that is it for this tutorial right here. Hope you found this useful and you learned something new, and I'll see you all in the next tutorial. So yeah.